Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today. We are trying to capture a massive, a massive vibe shift.
And not a subtle one. We're talking about maybe the most violent pendulum swing in English history.
We're looking at the year 1660. And to really get why this year matters, I think we have to look at what came right before it. Because the sources paint a picture of England in the 1650s that, well, frankly, it sounds exhausting.
Exhausting is the polite word. I think draconian might be the accurate one. This is the interregnum, the period between kings.
The king was dead, executed.
Right. Charles I, gone. Oliver Cromwell was in charge. And the Puritan regime had, well, they'd effectively criminalized fun.
I was looking at the list of bans in our notes, and it honestly feels like something out of a dystopian novel. Theaters. Boarded up.
Demolished in some cases. Or just left to rot for, 18 years? Actors were legally considered vagrants. If they were caught performing, they could be publicly whipped. It wasn't just a pause on entertainment. It was a systematic dismantling of an entire industry.
And Chris...
Banned. Completely banned. Parliament actually made a point of sitting on Christmas Day just to prove it was a normal workday.
To make a statement.
A huge statement. They saw the whole celebration as popish, too Catholic or pagan, and mostly just an excuse for drunkenness and disorder. If you were caught making a mince pie, you were practically committing an act of rebellion.
Even the maypoles were taken down. It's this total systematic repression of any kind of public joy.
Anything communal, anything that wasn't explicitly focused on solemn private worship was seen as suspect.
And then Cromwell dies. The whole regime just kind of crumbles. And in May 1660, Charles II, the son of the executed king, lands at Dover.
And the entire country just exhales. You can feel it in the writing from the time.
But it's not just a political change, is it? This is what I really want to dig into. The sources all describe it as an explosion. It really is like shaking a soda bottle for 18 years and then just twisting the cap off.
That is exactly the metaphor. You get this sudden, almost aggressive pursuit of pleasure. And you have to think about the new king. Charles has been in exile in France, watching the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King, and just soaking up that opulence, that wit, that permissiveness.
So he brings all of that back to this gray, rainy, repressed London.
And that creates this incredible tension because the Puritans didn't just vanish into thin air in 1660. They were still there. They were still your neighbors. And they were watching this new world unfold with absolute horror.
Suddenly their neighbors are wearing bright silks, they're drinking openly in taverns, and they're going to see these new racy plays.
Right. And that is the core friction of the Restoration. It's not just everyone had a big party. It's a culture war. On one side, you have the rakes, the courtiers, the wits, the libertines who mocked pretty much everything. And on the other side, you have the rebels, the religious dissenters who looked at this new world and saw the road to hell.
And today, we are going to watch that war play out on the page. We aren't just looking at history books. We are looking at the literature. We've got the secret diaries, the dirty plays, and believe it or not, the prison sermons.
It is a serious stack of sources. We've got the secret diary of Samuel Pepys, which gives us the day-to-day on-the-ground reality.
He's our eyewitness.
Our ultimate eyewitness. Then we have the comedies of William Wycherley and William Congreve representing the Rakes.
And for the rebels.
We have John Bunyan, the ultimate rebel, writing one of the most famous books in English history from a jail cell.
So we have Rakes, rebels, and eventually a kind of redemption. Let's start with the man the sources all call the ultimate guide, Samuel Pepys.
You really cannot tell the story of the 1660s without him.
What strikes me about Pepys, looking at the excerpts, is how incredibly modern he feels. He doesn't write like a statue or some stuffy historical figure. He writes like a guy who is, worried about his job. He likes looking at beautiful women, and he's really, really stressed about his finances.
He is the original main character, and you have to remember, this diary was encrypted. He wrote it in shorthand. He never, ever expected us to read it. And that's why we get everything. We know about his bowel movements, his furious fights with his wife, and exactly how much he spent on a new bottle of wine.
Let's talk about the format for a second, because I think it's crucial. When we say shorthand, we don't just mean he wrote quickly. It was a full-on code, right?
Yes, it was a system called Shelton's shorthand. To the untrained eye, it looks almost like Arabic or just random squiggles. It wasn't deciphered until the early 19th century. The diary sat in his personal library at Magdalen College, Cambridge, for over 100 years, and nobody had a clue what it said.
Which means there is zero filter. None.
Exactly. Most diaries of that time were written with the idea that God, or, maybe one's children might read them, they were spiritual ledgers, a record of your soul's progress. Pepys's diary is a data dump of his brain. It's raw, it's honest, and it's often very embarrassing.
And that honesty is what allows us to see the texture of life back then. The sources mention he records the mundane right alongside the massive.
That is the genius of it. In one entry, he'll be talking about a petty dispute at the Navy office or buying a new coat. He was obsessed with fashion, absolutely loved it. And in the very next sentence, he's describing a major national tragedy. It just collapses the distance between history with a capital H and just living your life.
He lived through a trifecta of disasters that is honestly hard to even comprehend. The Great Plague, the Great Fire, and the Anglo-Dutch War.
All within the space of just a few years. It's astonishing.
Let's talk about the plague first. In 1665, I think we've all just lived through a pandemic, so this hits a bit differently now. How does Pepys describe it?
It's eerie how familiar it sounds. He talks about the tracking of numbers. He watches the bills of mortality, the weekly published death counts, just creeping up. First a few dozen, then 100, then 1,000 a week.
And the rumors.
Oh, the rumors are constant. Is it in the city yet? I heard it's on this street. And then the emptiness. He describes walking through London and seeing the red crosses painted on the doors of infected houses with "Lord have mercy upon us" written there. The city shutting down.
It's the uncertainty that gets me in his entries. He's trying to go to work, trying to keep the Navy running for the war, while people are literally dropping dead in the streets around him.
And he's personally terrified. He's not some stoic observer. He writes about seeing corpses being carted away at night. There's a moment he buys a new wig, and then he's consumed with anxiety that the hair for the wig might have been cut from the head of a plague victim.
Wow.
It's those specific, visceral human fears that make it so real. It's not a statistic for him. It's a clear and present danger.
And then just as the plague starts to finally subside, the entire city catches fire. September 1666.
The Great Fire of London.
There's that famous series of entries during the fire. The current transcript mentioned he fled, but the details are what make it so wild. The fire is consuming London. St. Paul's Cathedral is burning. And what is Samuel Pepys doing? He's in his garden, digging a hole.
To save the important things.
His wine. And a wheel of Parmesan cheese.
It sounds completely ridiculous, doesn't it? The city is burning down. The lead from the roof of St. Paul's was literally melting and running down the streets like a river, and he's burying a cheese.
But that's why it's so perfect.
It is. That detail is why historians love him so much. It anchors this massive, catastrophic event in a totally mundane human reality. You have to understand, Parmesan cheese was an expensive import. It was a status symbol. He'd probably saved up for it. He wasn't going to let the fire have his prized cheese.
It really humanizes the panic. It's not just London burned. It's, how do I save my stuff? And where am I going to sleep tonight? He even moves his gold to a friend's house in the middle of the night for safekeeping.
And he becomes a hero, in a way. He's the one who runs to the king and his brother, the Duke of York, to tell them that the only way to stop the fire is to start blowing up houses to create fire breaks. He's thinking clearly in the middle of chaos.
So he's not just burying cheese.
No, but while he's doing all that, he's also a rising civil servant. He's navigating the machinery of the state, and that world is just as chaotic as the fire.
Right, he's not just a guy about town. He's clerk of the acts to the Navy board. He's basically running the Navy.
A very stressful job. The source material mentions the Anglo-Dutch War. England was fighting the Dutch for control of lucrative global trade routes, and the English Navy was completely, utterly broke.
And this brings us to that ticket scandal. Can you explain that? Because it sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
It was a total disaster. The king had no money. Parliament was suspicious of him and wouldn't give him enough. So the government couldn't pay its sailors. Instead of actual cash, they gave them tickets, which were basically government-issued IOUs that said, the king owes you £5.
And you can't buy bread with an IOU.
Exactly. So the sailors and their families were starving. They were rioting in the streets of London. Pepys records a terrifying moment where a mob of sailors surrounds his carriage screaming for their money. He writes in his diary, "Lord, how I am troubled." He was genuinely terrified they were going to tear him apart.
It just shows the fragility of this new government. The king is back, the parties are on, but the state is effectively bankrupt and the people are hungry.
It's a powder keg. And Pepys is sitting right on top of it, trying to keep the lid on.
And amidst all that stress, the kidney stone.
The stone. We have to talk about the stone.
He kept the stone on a special case.
He does. In 1658, just before the diary begins, he had a bladder stone the size of a tennis ball surgically removed. Now, you have to remember, this is 1658. There is no anesthesia. There are no antiseptics.
So it's just Whiskey and grit.
Essentially. They would literally tie you to a table, a couple of strong men would hold you down, and the surgeon would go in with a knife. The survival rate was abysmal. Most people died of shock on the table or infection afterwards.
The fact that he lived is an absolute miracle.
And he knew it. He was so grateful and so, frankly, proud of surviving this ordeal that every year on the anniversary of the surgery, he threw a stone feast.
A stone piece.
Yes. He invited all his friends over for a lavish dinner, and at some point he would bring out this special case he had made, open it up, and show everyone the stone he had passed, and they would toast to his bladder and his survival.
That is the most restoration thing I have ever heard. Come look at my calcified pain and let's have a drink.
But it speaks to that seize the day mentality, doesn't it? He knew he was living on borrowed time, so when the theaters opened, when the women appeared on stage for the first time, when the wine flowed, he partook. He soaked it all in and he wrote it all down.
Speaking of soaking it all in, let's move to section 2, the theater. Because while Pepys is burying his cheese and celebrating his bladder, the theaters are reopening. And this brings us to the Rakes.
The theaters reopen literally the moment the king comes back in 1660. And we have to reiterate how big a deal this was. For 18 years, professional acting was a crime. Now suddenly, the king is back, and he absolutely loves plays. He's the theater's biggest fan.
But it wasn't a free-for-all, was it? The king was pretty controlling about how it all happened.
Very. He issued royal patents, which are exclusive rights, to just 2 companies. The King's Company, led by Thomas Killigrew, and the Duke's Company, led by William Davenant. It was a duopoly.
So if you wanted to see a play in London, you only had 2 choices. That's it.
Yes. And because there were only 2, the competition between them was ferocious. They had to constantly outdo each other to get the audience's money. This drove massive innovation. They introduced movable, scenery-painted backdrops that could slide on grooves to change the location instantly.
Before this, Shakespeare's stage was pretty much a bare platform, right? You just had to use your imagination.
Exactly. Now, you had spectacle. They used machines for thunder and lightning. They had elaborate costumes. You had music. You had dancing. It was the birth of the modern immersive stage experience.
But the defining characteristic, the thing everyone knows about Restoration drama, is that it was filthy.
It was often considered immoral, yes. The sources say the plays mocked at all restraints. The historian George Norman Clark argues that the dramatists didn't just criticize accepted morality, they intended to glory in shocking people. They enjoyed it.
They were the professional trolls of the 17th century.
In a way, they mocked restraints on gambling, on drink, and especially on love and marriage. This gave birth to a whole new genre, the comedy of manners, which satirized the very specific social behaviors of the upper classes.
Let's unpack some of these plays because the plots sound absolutely wild. The sources highlight a few key ones. Let's start with William Wycherley's The Country Wife from 1675.
A classic, and probably the one that most supports the charge of obscenity. It's brilliant, but it's not subtle.
The plot revolves around a rake, a fashionable man of the town named Horner. And his grand scheme to sleep with as many married women as possible is unique.
It is a brilliant, deeply cynical premise. So Horner wants access to respectable ladies, but their husbands are constantly guarding them. So what does he do? He gets his doctor to spread a rumor that a botched surgery in France has left him impotent, a eunuch.
He pretends he can't perform so the husbands will trust him.
Exactly. In a society that is absolutely obsessed with male virility and securing a legitimate heir by declaring himself a eunuch, he becomes safe. The paranoid husbands, who are terrified of being made a cuckold, suddenly view him as a non-threat. They literally shove their wives at him. Oh, go keep poor Mr. Horner company. He's harmless.
Which leads directly to the famous China scene. I want to unpack this dialogue because the sources say it's a masterclass in double entendre.
It is probably the most famous scene in all of Restoration drama. So Horner takes a character, a married woman named Lady Fidget, into a back room, supposedly to look at his private collection of China porcelain cups and saucers.
Which was a very trendy, expensive luxury item at the time, like having the newest iPhone.
Incredibly trendy, a status symbol. So the husband is standing just outside the closed door, listening in. He hears them talking about the china, and he's pleased. Then Lady Fidget comes out all flustered, holding a piece of porcelain, and she says something like, "Oh, Horner, I shall never forget your precious china."
And then another woman arrives.
Mrs. Squeamish. And she says, "Oh, I hear you have the most wonderful china. I simply must see it too." And Horner looks at her and says, and this is the killer line, Alas, I have no china left. I have given it all to Lady Fidget.
Okay, that is not subtle at all.
It's incredibly graphic, really,
Right.
but the entire audience is in on the joke. They are laughing at the clueless husband who is standing right there, nodding along, thinking they're just talking about porcelain.
But why China? Why that specific object? Is there a link between this new consumerism, the buying of things, and the sex?
That's a great insight. The Restoration was really the beginning of a new consumer culture in London. Shopping was becoming a hobby for the wealthy. By equating sex with China, Wycherley is saying that in this society, people are just commodities. Sex is just another transaction. You collect lovers like you collect fancy teacups.
It makes everyone involved look terrible.
Yeah.
The women are insatiable, the men are either predators or complete idiots. There's no moral center to this world.
And that's the point. The Puritans wanted art to be moral, to teach a lesson. The Restoration playwrights wanted art to be a mirror. A funhouse mirror, maybe, but one that reflected the cynicism and materialism of the court.
And then we have the country wife herself, a character named Marjorie. How does she fit into this city of liars?
Marjorie is the natural woman. She's from the country. She's been kept locked up by her jealous old husband, and she doesn't know the rules of London society. She doesn't know you're supposed to lie about your desires. So she almost exposes the truth about Horner just by being blunt and enthusiastic about how much she likes him. Her innocence is actually a danger to the secretive, lying society of the city.
It's almost like the play is saying that civilization is just learning how to lie properly.
Precisely. Sophistication is hypocrisy. Then we get George Etheridge's The Man of Mode from 1676. And this introduces us to Dorimant, who is the ultimate smooth-talking, devastatingly charming rake.
And he was based on a real person,
Yeah.
right? The audience would have known who they were lampooning.
Yes, almost certainly based on the Earl of Rochester, John Wilmot. He was a notorious courtier, a brilliant poet, and an infamous libertine. Dorimant is witty, intellectual, cruel, and sexually irresistible. He became the template for the glamorous Restoration rake. The audience would have recognized the portrait immediately.
It sounds like they were just turning their real-life friends and enemies into characters.
Yeah. They absolutely were. It was a very small, insular world. The people in the expensive seats in the audience were often the very people being satirized on stage.
But by the year 1700, things started to shift a bit. We get William Congreve's The Way of the World. This one sounds different. The humor is more verbal, less physical.
It is. It's considered Congreve's masterpiece, but it's more complex, more psychological. The plot involves two lovers, Maribel and Millamant, who are trying to get permission to marry from Millamant's tyrannical aunt, Lady Wishfort, in order to secure Millamant's fortune. But the real highlight here is the proviso scene.
The proviso scene. This is basically a prenup negotiation on stage.
It is the wittiest prenuptial negotiation you'll ever see. Instead of just declaring undying love, they very coolly and rationally lay out the rules for their marriage. Millamant, the heroine, lays down her conditions first.
Like what?
Things like, I won't be called names like wife, spouse, love, joy, jewel, pigeon, or duck.
Don't call me pigeon. That's a very reasonable request.
She wants to maintain her independence. She says she must be allowed to pay and receive visits, to write letters without his inspection, and I will be solicited to the very last. Meaning, don't take me for granted just because we're married. You still have to court me.
It feels much more mature than the China jokes. It's about power and respect within a relationship.
It is. It's a definite shift from pure sex comedy to a focus on money, marriage contracts, and social maneuvering. The play still makes fun of the society of its time, but it also suggests that a true modern love requires clear boundaries and mutual respect, not just passion.
No, we absolutely can't talk about Restoration Theater without talking about the biggest change of all, the women.
A massive revolutionary change. For the first time in English history, professional actresses replaced boy players in female roles.
Finally, before this, Julia was played by a teenage boy in a dress and a wig.
Which added a whole different layer of interpretive confusion. But now you had real women on stage, and you had real stars. Actresses like Nell Gwynn, who famously started out as an orange seller in the theater and became the king's mistress and a superstar of comedy.
But with the actresses came a very specific phenomenon, the breeches role. I want to dig into this because the sources present a real conflict here. First, can you explain what a breeches role was?
A breeches role is any part where the plot requires a woman to disguise herself as a man. So she would be on stage wearing breeches, those tight knee-length pants, and a man's coat. The plot reason was usually that the heroine was escaping a bad marriage or going on an adventure.
But there was a commercial reason, too, a much more obvious one.
Oh, definitely. You have to remember, women's fashion at the time was voluminous. Long, heavy skirts, petticoats, hoops. You never saw a woman's legs. The brooch's role was often the only opportunity for the audience to see the actress's figure. It was a major selling point for the predominantly male audience. The playbills would advertise it.
So was this empowering or was it just objectification? What's the debate?
That is the big feminist debate that still goes on. On one hand, some critics see it as genuinely subversive. The woman gets to shed her restrictive clothing. She carries a sword. She speaks her mind with a freedom usually reserved for men. She gets to be the agent of the plot.
But others disagree.
Yes. Critics like Elizabeth Howe argue that when you look at the prologues and epilogues, which were often spoken directly to the audience by these women in breeches, they are often incredibly sexualized.
Yeah.
They argue it was little more than a means of displaying the actress as a sexual object for the titillation of male patrons.
So it's complicated. It gave them a career and a voice and a kind of freedom, but it came with strings attached. They had played the game.
As with most things in the Restoration, it was a time of new opportunities, but also new forms of exploitation.
Okay, let's move to section 3. Because these plays weren't just about sex and marriage contracts, they were also deeply, deeply political.
Politics in disguise. You have to remember, this was a fragile time. The monarchy was back, but the tensions that caused the Civil War in the first place hadn't just vanished. You had the emergence of the first political parties, the Whigs and the Tories.
Can we briefly define those for the listener? I feel like we hear those terms a lot, but the meanings can be a bit fuzzy.
Sure. Very broadly speaking, the Tories were the party of the court. They were supporters of the king and the established Anglican Church. They believed in the divine right of monarchs and a strong, centralized authority.
And the Whigs.
The Whigs were more the party of the city and the country gentry. They were suspicious of royal power, more supportive of the rights of Parliament, and, above all, they were terrified of Catholicism.
And plays became a way to comment on this fight without, getting thrown in jail.
Yes. If you wrote a pamphlet directly criticizing the king, you could be arrested for seditious libel. It was dangerous. So you used allegory, you talked about the other. Specifically, playwrights used settings like the Ottoman Empire, you see a lot of plays about the Turk, to talk about English politics.
So a play set in Morocco isn't really about Morocco at all.
Rarely. The source material highlights Elkanah Settle's The Empress of Morocco. By portraying a tyrant in a far-off exotic Eastern setting, you could criticize tyranny in general, perhaps hinting at the king or his powerful ministers, without being accused of treason. It was a coded way to discuss very real domestic concerns.
And the sources mention the popish plot. That sounds ominous, but what was it actually?
It was a period of absolute mass hysteria in the late 1670s. A con man named Titus Oates fabricated a conspiracy theory that the Jesuits were planning to assassinate King Charles II in order to put his brother James on the throne.
And James was an open Catholic.
Yes, and for the English Protestant imagination, a Catholic king meant a return to the days of Bloody Mary, burnings at the stake, and becoming a puppet of the Pope in Rome. It was an existential panic.
So the exclusion crisis mentioned in the notes was about trying to literally exclude James from the line of succession.
Exactly. The Whigs in Parliament tried to pass a bill to ban James from ever becoming king. The Tories blocked it, supporting him because he was the rightful heir. This struggle tore the country apart, and it played out on stage every night.
So the theater was basically the cable news of the 1670s, with each side having their own shows.
That's a great analogy. The source from Dr. Mateb Onweren notes that a playwright's political allegiance, Whig or Tory, completely determined how they represented these characters and themes. It was a battlefield. Whig writers like Thomas Shadwell were constantly battling Tory writers like John Dryden through their plays.
Speaking of Dryden, that brings us perfectly to section 4, the Titan of the Age. The sources call him the king of Restoration literature.
John Dryden. He absolutely defined the era. So much so that some literary historians just call it the Age of Dryden. If the Beatles were the British invasion, Dryden was the literary restoration.
That is incredibly high praise. What made him so important?
Versatility and, frankly, dominance. He wrote everything. He wrote blockbuster plays, tragedies, and comedies. He wrote major political poems. He was an influential literary critic who basically told people how to read. And he did brilliant translations of classical authors like Virgil. He also popularized the heroic couplet.
What exactly is a heroic couplet?
It's a pair of rhyming lines written in iambic pentameter, so 10 syllables per line, with an alternating unstressed and stressed beat. It sounds very structured, very orderly, very balanced. Think, a little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep or taste not the Pierian spring.
That's very neat and tidy.
It is, and in a chaotic world that had just gone through a civil war, that sense of order and control was very appealing. Dryden used this form to bring a sense of classical authority and balance to English poetry.
But he was also a master of satire, a real attack dog. We have to talk about Mac Flecknoe.
Mac Flecknoe, from around 1682, this is the ultimate mock epic.
Explain that concept for us, a mock epic.
So a true epic is a grand poem like the Odyssey or the Aeneid. It uses incredibly elevated, serious language to talk about heroes, gods, and the founding of nations. A mock epic uses that same grand, serious language, but applies it to something completely trivial or stupid to make it look ridiculous.
So he's treating something silly as if it's a huge deal, just to mock it.
Exactly. He takes his literary rival, Thomas Shadwell, the Whig playwright we just mentioned, and writes this poem treating him as if he is a great prince. But he's the prince of the kingdom of dullness.
That's brutal.
It's devastatingly funny. He describes Shadwell's coronation as the new monarch of nonsense and bad poetry. He writes, "The rest to some faint meaning make pretense, but Shadwell never deviates into sense."
Never deviates into sense. That is the ultimate literary diss.
It pretty much is. And it established satire as a major political and literary weapon. It heavily influenced the next generation, especially Alexander Pope. But Dryden wasn't just about literary jokes. He was deeply involved in the huge intellectual shifts of the time. This was the age of the Royal Society, founded in 1660, the dawn of modern science.
How does a poet fit into the push for science?
Through language. The scientists, men like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, wanted to describe the world accurately and objectively. They felt that English prose was too flowery, too cluttered with metaphors and rhetorical tricks. So the Royal Society appointed a committee in 1664 to improve the English language.
To clean it up, to make it more precise.
Exactly. They wanted a plain, direct style suitable for communicating scientific truth. And Dryden was on that committee. They advocated for information delivered in a clear, unadorned way. And you can see it in his own prose, which is remarkably clear and modern compared to the writers who came before him. He helped invent the way we write clear, argumentative English today.
So we have Dryden, polished, scientific, satirical, the undisputed king of literature holding court in London. But while he was at the absolute center of power, someone else was having a very, very different experience. Section 5, the rebel in prison. Jump onion.
The contrast here is just staggering. While the court was partying and Dryden was writing his perfectly balanced couplets, John Bunyan was sitting in a Bedford jail.
Who was he? What was his background?
He was a tinker, an itinerant mender of pots and pans. He was from the working class. He had no formal university education. He was poor, and he was a nonconformist preacher, a Baptist.
Nonconformist meaning he didn't belong to the official state-sanctioned Church of England.
Right, and under the new laws of the Restoration, preaching to a group of more than 5 people outside of the official church was illegal. It was seen as a potential source of sedition. Bunyan was arrested for this in 1660, the very same year the king returned.
He was in prison for 12 years, and the sources say he could have gotten out at any time if he just promised to stop preaching.
Yes. The local magistrates basically said, "Look, John, we don't want to keep you here. Just promise you won't hold these illegal meetings, and you can go home to your family." And this was a real hardship for him. He had a wife and several children, including a blind daughter he adored. They needed him.
But he refused.
He was steadfast. His famous quote on the matter was, "I will stay in prison until the moss grows on my eyebrows, rather than thus to violate my faith and my principles."
Until the moss grows on my eyebrows. That is some serious commitment. And while he was in there, he started to write a masterpiece.
The Pilgrim's Progress. It was written largely in prison, and it's a powerful allegory, a story where every character and every place represents a real-world, spiritual concept.
I think most people have heard the title, but walk us through the journey. What is the basic story?
The protagonist is an everyman named Christian. He's reading a book, which is the Bible, and realizes he has a heavy burden on his back, representing his sin. He becomes terrified that his town, the city of destruction, is going to be burned with fire from heaven. So he leaves his home and family to find the celestial city, or heaven.
And the places he visits on this journey have become part of our language. The Slough of Despond.
Yes, the Slough of Despond. It's this swamp, a bog of mud and filth. Christian falls into it very early in his journey, and the burden on his back makes him sink. It represents the crushing depression, the guilt, and the despair that can hit someone when they first confront their own failings. It's sticky, it drags you down. It's such a vivid image of mental and spiritual struggle.
And Vanity Fair, that comes from this book, right? That a lot of people know the magazine, but not the source.
It absolutely comes from this book. Christian and his friend Faithful pass through a city called Vanity Fair. It's a year-round marketplace. And what is sold there? Houses, lands, trades, titles, honors, lusts, pleasures, anything you can imagine.
It sounds an awful lot like the court of Charles II.
That is exactly what it is. It's Bunyan's blistering critique of the Restoration world. It's all about materialism, status, and pleasure. Everything is for sale. And because Christian and Faithful won't buy any of the merchandise, they say, "We buy the truth." They are mocked, beaten, and put on a show trial. Faithful is actually martyred burned at the stake in Vanity Fair.
So Bunyan is looking out from his prison cell at the rakes and the parties and saying, this is death. This is just vanity.
Precisely. It's a complete rejection of that entire value system.
The sources go into detail about a specific character named Talkative. I want to dig into this because it feels incredibly relevant even today. Who is Talkative?
Talkative is one of Bunyan's sharpest and most enduring satires. Christian and Faithful meet him on the road. And at first, Talkative seems like great company. He absolutely loves to discuss religion. He can quote scripture. He can debate fine points of theology. He talks about the history of the mystery. He sounds like a perfect saint.
But Christian isn't buying it. He's suspicious.
No. Christian knows him from his hometown. He pulls Faithful aside and tells him that Talkative is a saint abroad and a devil at home.
So he knows all the right words, but he doesn't live the life.
Exactly. Christian says his religion is all in his tongue. At home, he's abusive to his family. In his business, he cheats his customers. He drinks and carouses with sinners. But he loves to talk about theology. Faithful eventually confronts him, asking, "How does this grace you talk about actually show itself in your life?" And Talkative gets deeply offended and storms off.
It represents the difference between intellectual knowledge and, as Bunyan puts it, a true work of grace in the heart.
It was a direct shot at the kind of religious hypocrisy Bunyan saw all around him, but it endures because we all know a Talkative.
And the style of the book is so crucial. We talked about Dryden's polished, balanced, scientific English. Bunyan didn't write like that at all.
Not even close. Bunyan wrote in what scholars call bee-blind language. It echoes the simple, powerful cadences of the King James Bible. It's earthy, it's rough, it's direct. It uses a lot of simple, one-syllable words. It's not the Latin-heavy, sophisticated style of the court wits. It was the language of the common people.
And that's why it sold so well, right?
It became a phenomenon. For a very long time, in many English-speaking households, if you owned two books, they were the Bible and the Pilgrim's Progress. It shaped the English imagination from the bottom up, while Dryden was shaping it from the top down.
So you have the highbrow satire of Dryden and the lowbrow, deeply felt faith of Bunyan running on these two parallel tracks. But there's a third group rising up, isn't there? Section 6, the rise of the woman writer.
This is a critical development. As we move out of the High Restoration period and into the early 18th century, we see the real professional rise of the woman writer. We mentioned Aphra Behn earlier. She was the true pioneer, the first woman in England to really make a living by her pen.
All women together ought to let flowers fall upon the tomb of Aphra Behn, as Virginia Woolf famously said.
Because she proved it could be done. She earned them the right to speak their minds and get paid for it. But the sources also highlight another crucial figure, Eliza Haywood.
Eliza Haywood. The notes say she was incredibly prolific.
Prolific is an understatement. She was a machine. Her novel, Love in Excess from 1719, was a massive bestseller. It ran 4 editions in 4 years, which was huge back then. But here is the crazy stat. In the year 1725 alone, she published 10 novels.
10 novels in a single year. That's Stephen King levels of output. Actually, I think that's faster than Stephen King. How is that even physically possible?
Well, the novels were shorter than what we think of today, more like novellas, but it just shows the incredible demand. There's a hungry market and she was feeding it. This connects to what's called the feminization of the novel. Novels began to focus more on themes of love, courtship, domestic life, and emotion themes that appealed to the rapidly growing female readership.
And the whole business model for being a writer was changing too, right?
This is key. In the past, a writer like Dryden relied heavily on patronage. You'd find a rich duke or earl, you'd dedicate your poem to him, and he'd give you money. But now, we see the rise of commercialism. Writers began selling their work directly to publishers, who then sold it to the public.
And libraries played a role in this too.
A huge role. The growth of circulating libraries meant that everyone had access to fiction. You didn't have to be rich enough to buy your own leather-bound volume. For a small fee, you could rent it. This massive expansion of the reading public helped women writers flourish because they could bypass the old, male-dominated gatekeepers of the court and the universities and appeal directly to readers.
But the gatekeepers fought back.
They did, viciously. Eliza Haywood faced a severe backlash. Alexander Pope, the great satirist of the next generation, who was heavily influenced by Dryden, attacked her savagely in his mock epic poem, The Dunciad. He portrayed her as this monstrous, sexually voracious, shameless scribbler.
Why the attack? Was it just sexism?
It was partly sexism, absolutely. The proper male literary establishment looked down on these popular romances as trash, but it was also professional jealousy. She was selling, she was popular, and Pope saw her as a rival for public attention. The source says this attack almost destroyed her career. She wrote very little for a long time after that.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't a straight line. There's always pushback.
No, it isn't. But the door had been kicked open. It couldn't be shut again.
So the party was raging in the 1660s and 70s. The theaters were full, the presses were running, but eventually the lights have to come on. Section 7, the party ends.
By the late 1690s, the public mood had definitely shifted. A new generation had grown up that didn't remember the repression of the Puritans. They were just tired of the immoral plays. The cynicism of the Rakes was starting to feel stale, even a little bit boring, and the backlash arrived in the form of a man named Jeremy Collier.
Who was he? A politician?
No, a clergyman, a very angry clergyman. In 1698, he published a pamphlet with the wonderfully direct title, A Short View of the Immorality and Profaneness of the English Stage.
It does exactly what it says on the tin then.
It really does. He went through the plays of Congreve, Wycherley, and even the great Dryden, and he meticulously cataloged every swear word, every blasphemy, every sexual innuendo, and he made a powerful argument that the stage shouldn't just be about entertainment or vice. It had a moral duty to teach virtue.
And surprisingly, people listened.
It was a runaway bestseller. It tapped into a changing public sentiment. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 had happened. The Catholic King James II was kicked out, and the Protestant William and Mary were invited to take the throne. The country was settling down. People wanted reformation and respectability. Collier's pamphlet gave them the ammunition.
How did the playwrights react? Did they just double down on the filth?
They tried to defend themselves in print, but they also tried to adapt. We mentioned Congreve's The Way of the World earlier. That was written in 1700, just 2 years after Collier's attack. It's less slapstick, it's more psychological, it's more refined. But even then, the audience wasn't as enthusiastic. The tide had turned.
So Restoration comedy just died out.
It faded away, yes. It was replaced by a new genre called sentimental comedy. These were plays where the characters were fundamentally good and virtuous, and the audience was meant to cry tears of sympathy for their plight rather than laugh at their vices.
The wild days were officially over. The Rakes had to grow up or go home.
They did. The pendulum, which had swung so violently towards license, swung back towards the middle, towards a more sober, moral, commercial society. You go from the repression of the Puritans to the absolute hedonism of the Restoration, and then you settle into the polite society of the 18th century.
It's such a fascinating arc. It really shows how culture is always in this process of action and reaction, constantly correcting itself.
It is a perfect example of the dialectic of history. You have the thesis of Puritanism, the antithesis of the Restoration, and then the synthesis of the Augustan Age.
So after all this, what does it all mean for us? Let's try to wrap this up.
I think the Restoration was, above all, a time of extremes. You had the Great Fire physically destroying the city, and the great parties rebuilding its spirit. You had the polished, cynical, courtly satire of Dryden running parallel to the raw, unyielding common faith of Bunyan. And you saw the rise of the actress and the woman writer claiming a public space for the first time.
It's a lot of conflict. A lot of tension.
It is. But that conflict, that tension, is what produced some of the most vibrant and challenging literature in English history. It forces us to look at what we value. Is it wit? Is it faith? Is it pleasure? Is it order?
And that brings us to our final thought for you to take away.
Reading again about Bunyan's character Talkative really struck a chord with me this time around. The source material mentions that Talkative is still incredibly relevant today.
Also,
Well, think about it. We live in an age of social media. We are constantly performing our identities online. We post about our virtues, our political causes, our correct opinions on every issue. We are all very, very good at talking the right language.
we are all talkative, from Prating Row, as Bunyan called his home street.
Exactly. The literature of the Restoration asks us a really uncomfortable question. Are we just citizens of Vanity Fair, buying into the spectacle, the performance, the china, and the commerce? Or are we actually on a pilgrimage? Is there a real work of grace in our hearts, or is our religion, whatever it may be, just in our tongue? It's a question worth asking next time you scroll through your feed.
That is a very provocative thought to leave on. I'd encourage everyone listening to maybe pick up a page of Pepys' diary or a chapter of The Pilgrim's Progress. You might be surprised at how little human nature has actually changed in 350 years.
Indeed. The clothes change, the technology changes, but the people remain very much the same.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.